Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're doing a bit of a forensic analysis on a paradox that I think a lot of us have noticed.
Is
Why does a modern civilian police force in a democratic country sometimes still look and definitely feel like a remnant of a colonial army? We are digging deep into the historical and the structural foundations of law enforcement.
We really are. We're talking about legacy, but this isn't just, abstract history. We are literally tracing the lineage of police administration back through centuries,
Right.
right back to ancient statecraft, and then crucially to the defining choices that were made during the British Raj. If you, as a learner, really want to understand modern organizational behavior and why certain challenges like, say, public trust or bureaucratic inertia just seem to persist.
Yeah, why they're so sticky.
Exactly. You have to look at the choices that were made back in the 19th century.
Absolutely. So our mission today is kind of a structural archaeology project. We're tracing the evolution of these policing models, and we're really focusing on that critical moment, that juncture where the system was set up for one of two things.
Public service or population control.
Exactly. We're going to examine the lineage, the key legislative blueprints, and how the resulting structural and cultural legacies, right down to the job description of the lowest constable, are still running on colonial software.
And that just sets the stage perfectly with that core tension you mentioned. Is policing fundamentally a service, meant to assist and protect the community?
Yeah.
Or is it a force designed primarily to enforce the power of the ruling authority? We're going to demonstrate how one model was very aggressively chosen over the other. And that single choice, it remains the biggest determinant of organizational conduct and modern reform struggles. So yeah, let's unpack this.
Let's do it. So to really understand these foundations, we have to recognize that orderly governance isn't a new idea. Our sources, interestingly, immediately connect this concept of statecraft and stability to dialogue and, democratic inclusion.
That's a crucial starting point, and it's one that's often overlooked. The foundational belief in nation building, especially in a vast and really diverse region, is that democratic dialogue is essential for resolving conflicts.
So it can't just be top-down decrees.
No, governance can't rely purely on decrees. It has to address grievances to ensure stability.
But even, way before modern democratic structures existed, the concept of statecraft itself dictated a very systematic approach to order. And this was based on two philosophical pillars, dharma and danda.
That's right. Dharma we can understand as duty or righteousness, basically the moral and ethical foundation that holds a society together. It gives you the framework for proper conduct.
And danda is the counterpoint to that. It's the enforcement mechanism.
Exactly. It refers to punishment or coercion when dharma is transgressed. So the state needed a systematic law for punishing evildoers, which they called dandaneti.
So policing was, it was inherently integrated into the philosophy of the state itself from the very beginning.
And this wasn't just, abstract philosophy. We have evidence of highly systematic structures dating back to antiquity, particularly during the Mauryan and Gupta periods. We rely pretty heavily on Kautilya's Arthashastra.
The ancient playbook for political and economic statecraft.
The very same.
So what specifically does Arthashastra tell us about those ancient policing structures? Was it just, reactive? Or was it more systematic?
Oh, it was incredibly systematic.
Yeah.
Kautilya detailed methods for the state to maintain order and, crucially, to gather intelligence. He envisioned a highly centralized system where policing was intrinsically linked with espionage.
Wow.
Yeah, there were specific rules for the conduct of officials, the categorization of crime, and the maintenance of internal security. It really proves that centralized, systematic policing, including undercover operatives and a clear chain of command, was an established administrative reality centuries before any foreign power showed up.
That sets a huge precedent for a defined administrative structure. So then let's jump forward to the Mughal era, because that's when things become geographically precise, and they establish a clear administrative structure that the British later found, extremely convenient to adopt and modify.
Right. The Mughals institutionalized a very formal, multi-tiered structure that clearly delineated jurisdictional control. And it's the structure we can still recognize today.
So what did that look like?
At the highest level of administration, you had the Subadar in charge of the entire province, which was known as the Sub.
Okay, so that sounds kind of like a modern governor or maybe a chief executive of a large state.
Precisely. And then moving down from there, the critical layer was the district level, the Sarkar. This was managed by the Faujdar.
The Faujdar. Now, that was a more complex role, wasn't it?
Very complex. The Faujar acted as a military commander but was also responsible for maintaining general law and order, chasing robbers, and suppressing any minor uprisings.
So the Faujdar was more military than civilian police then.
Generally, yes. They were really the armed wing of district control, but crucially for local policing, the lowest, most public-facing level was the Thana.
The local police station.
The local police station overseen by the Thanadar, and the Thanadar was the clear precursor to the modern station house officer. This whole system established defined physical boundaries and local authority structures that the British realized were incredibly efficient for local control.
So by the time the East India Company arrives, they are not entering a vacuum at all. They're inheriting a functioning, tiered tradition of systematic, geographically defined order established by the Mughals, which was itself built on centuries of administrative thought from that Dharma and Danda tradition.
And what's fascinating is how seamlessly the British could just step into this tiered structure. But, when the East India Company finally did arrive, their purpose was dramatically different from previous rulers. Their goal wasn't integration based on Dharma.
It was profit and control.
Exactly. Profit and control.
Which brings us to a major shift.
Right. So when the East India Company began its conquest, they didn't immediately set up a separate civilian police department. Their initial conflict resolution mechanisms, they just relied on military officials. And what should immediately jump out to you here is their primary objective.
Which way?
Protecting commercial interests and trade routes, not, providing general civil peace for the populace.
Wait, hold on. If they were a trading entity, why didn't they just hire private security guards? Or, rely on the existing local Thanadars? Why use military officials? That sounds way more expensive and aggressive.
Because the challenges they were facing weren't just simple robbery. They were facing political resistance and major civil disputes that threatened their massive commercial operations. Military solutions were just faster, they were more coercive, and they reinforced the image of an unbeatable foreign power.
Ah, okay.
But as they transitioned from being just a trading company to a governing authority, this ad hoc system started to fail, and that forced them to look at establishing a dedicated police structure.
And this brings us right to that critical inflection point in the 19th century, where the British had two established yet completely opposite models of policing they could choose from for their new territory. Let's start with the ideal, the Metropolitan Bobby system.
This is the London model, famously created by Sir Robert Peel back in 1829. And the philosophy here was, for the time, radical. Police is public and public is police.
So the power comes from the people.
Peel believed that the power of the police must derive from the people, not from the state. This viewed policing unequivocally as a service.
And the principles of Peelian policing, they really underscore this service model. The officers were uniformed, but they were intentionally unarmed. They were meant to rely on persuasion and prevention, not coercion. Their effectiveness was entirely dependent on public trust and confidence.
Right, and the system was also designed to be autonomous, free from direct political or administrative interference.
So it was really community policing designed for a free, developing society.
It was. And Western developed countries, including the United States, they adopted this model in principle because it aligned with governance through consent. It aimed to minimize force and maximize public goodwill.
Okay, so hold that image in your mind, that idea of trust and autonomy, because we are about to pivot immediately to the second model, which is the complete philosophical opposite, the Irish constabulary system.
Right. This model was designed for a colony, not for a community. Its sole purpose was to control the Irish population, which was, fundamentally hostile to British occupation. This system did not aim to build trust. It aimed to suppress dissent.
So the philosophy shifted completely. Police was viewed as a force like a domestic army, not a civilian service.
It was overtly modeled on the military. They lived in barracks. They demanded unquestionable obedience. And it was explicitly meant for the strict subordination of the people. It was, let's call it what it was, an occupation force disguised as a police department.
So you got these two templates, London, which is all about trust and service, and Ireland, which is control and force. And then in 1843, Sir Charles Napier, the governor of Sindh, He's credited as the father of the Indian police system because he creates the first civilian system there.
And Napier makes the defining choice.
He adopted the Irish constabulary model.
He did, because the British priority in Sindh and soon across all of India was not the establishment of public service. It was effective centralized population control. They needed a disciplined military-style force that could be deployed rapidly to quell any disorder.
But the real catalyst, the thing that cemented this choice across the entire subcontinent, moving it from just a regional experiment to an institutional necessity, that was the trauma of the Revolt of 1857.
The revolt was a huge existential shock to the British administration. It revealed that their existing administrative and military control was highly vulnerable, and that native loyalty, especially within the ranks, was far from guaranteed.
They panicked.
They realized they needed a comprehensive pan-India civilian police structure that was fundamentally designed to prevent future large-scale uprisings.
So the goal shifts instantly from just commercial protection to full-on regime security. They needed a structure that guaranteed unquestioning loyalty up the chain of command, protected British administrative interests, and could quickly suppress civil disturbances with minimal political accountability.
And that desperation, that focus on control, it all culminated in the Indian Police Act of 1861. And this legislation, it took that militarized, control-oriented Irish constabulary model, the force paradigm, and institutionalized it across the entire landmass.
And that guaranteed that the structure and culture of policing would prioritize state obedience above citizen service for the next century and a half.
At least.
So the 1861 Act wasn't just, a piece of legislation. It was a structural blueprint designed specifically to maintain power in the hands of the colonial rulers. Let's look at the immediate institutional structure it created, which, it persists today. The first immediate legacy was regionalization.
That's right. Law and order was deemed a local issue, so that made the police a provincial affair, or, as the Constitution later termed it, a state subject.
Okay.
The organizational head of the force was the Inspector General of Police, the IGP, which sets up the modern hierarchy. And crucially, it retained that Mughal tradition. The Thana level remained the primary, the defining, and, the most burdened point of interaction with the public.
This is where it gets really interesting structurally, for me at least.
Yeah.
The introduction and perpetuation of dual control. This is so central to understanding why law enforcement is often slow or politically motivated at the grassroots.
Dual control is a brilliant and often incredibly frustrating structural legacy born out of that colonial strategy. It means that the police, specifically the superintendent of police, or SP, who is the operational head of law enforcement in the district, operates under the general control of the district magistrate, the DM.
Okay, we need to go into detail here. What exactly is the district magistrate responsible for that creates this structural clash?
So the DM is the civilian administrator, traditionally known as the collector. They are the absolute apex of executive power in the district. Their responsibilities are vast. Revenue collection, presiding over executive justice.
Like licensing and security regulations.
Exactly, and acting as the general representative of the state government. The SP, by contrast, is responsible for investigation, maintaining internal discipline within the police force, and managing operational deployment.
So let me get this straight. The police force, which carries the mandate for investigation and maintaining public order, is structurally subservient to the administrative authority, who has a whole list of non-police priorities like revenue collection, political mandates, or, say, election management.
Exactly. This ensures that the organized armed police force cannot act independently of the civilian executive. Now, while the initial intent was to ensure civilian oversight, the practical outcome is operational friction. An SPM might need resources prioritized for a major crime investigation, but the DM might direct those resources, or the SP's attention, to politically sensitive tasks like land disputes or managing a public procession that's related to revenue matters.
So police priorities can often be dictated by administrative or political needs, overriding strict law enforcement requirements.
All the time. It's a profound structural barrier to efficiency right there at the district level.
Wow. Now let's talk about the structure of power within the force itself. Because the sources detail this massive organizational imbalance, what they call the pyramidal structure.
And the structure was entirely deliberate. The British concentrated all effective decision-making power at the very top, where the European officials sat, and they ensured the bottom layers, which were overwhelmingly native Indian constables were kept institutionally powerless.
Wow.
It was a core mechanism to prevent coordination and rebellion.
And the data shows this imbalance persists in extreme form today. So let's look at the current composition our sources provide. If you look at the top management, deputy superintendents or DSPs and above, the people who hold real discretionary authority, that's less than 1% of the force.
Just 0.8%.
Tiny.
Then you have the critical middle management layer. Inspectors, sub-inspectors, SI, and assistant sub-inspectors, ASI, they account for about 11.5%. These are the people responsible for running police stations and conducting major investigations.
And then the heavy base.
Yeah.
The people doing the majority of the groundwork, the public-facing policing, the constant beat duty, the head constables and constables, they make up a staggering 87% of the entire force.
And this is the critical insight here. The operational burden, the stress, the public interaction, the paperwork, it is all concentrated entirely at the lowest, least empowered, and most vulnerable levels of the organization.
So the vast majority of the police force is institutionally powerless, while this tiny minority at the top holds all the discretionary authority.
Yes, and that persistent inefficiency and low morale we see is a direct legacy of that initial colonial control strategy.
Before we move on to the law itself, we have to note the structural departure the British introduced for dense urban centers, the commissioner system.
Right. Starting in cities like Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta in the early 20th century, the British realized that that general rural administration, the dual control model, was just too slow for specialized urban policing. The commissioner system was introduced to cater to those specialized urban needs by consolidating police authority and separating it from the general rural administration structure.
So it was an early recognition that cities required faster, more focused police leadership.
It was.
So if the architecture is the house, then the Indian Police Act of 1861 is the foundational deed.
That's a great way to put it. And it is truly remarkable that despite various states enacting newer legislation, the core structure, the terminology, and the command philosophy remain a direct replica of this colonial act.
And it's more than just the Police Act, isn't it? The entire operational ecosystem still functions using legal texts that were written for a colonial subject population.
Absolutely. The IPC, the Indian Penal Code from 1862, the Evidence Act from 1872, and the Arms Act from 1878. We are policing a 21st century democracy using rulebooks written for 19th century coercion.
Let's analyze some specific sections of the 1861 Act because they explicitly define and mandate that force mentality over the service mentality.
We have to start with the cornerstone, Section 23. This section explicitly defines the role of the police as following orders and maintaining order.
And what's crucial here is what the sources emphatically state is missing from that definition.
Right. Section 23 does not mention serving the people or protecting the citizen. The legal definition of a police officer's duty prioritizes obeying the hierarchy and maintaining state order.
So that's the legal bedrock of the command and control ethos. An officer's primary duty is to his superior and to maintaining the state's concept of order, not to the community.
And if we connect this back to the Irish constabulary model, this provision legally institutionalized that idea that police exist to enforce state power. It makes obedience the highest virtue and community service. Well, an implied secondary function, if it's even recognized at all.
And that militaristic approach is reinforced by Section 15.
Correct. Section 15 allows states to maintain reserved forces for managing riots and internal disturbances. So when the system faces a challenge, be it civil unrest or a major political demonstration, the legal framework defaults to a paramilitary solution.
Which is a direct lineage from the need to suppress uprisings like 1857.
Exactly.
There's another powerful discretionary section, Section 30.
Yes, and this section grants police extremely wide discretionary power over public life, specifically the power to authorize, to regulate, or even to ban public assemblies and processions. This power, which was granted when fundamental rights were non-existent for the local population, directly impacts modern democratic rights to protest and assembly. It gives the police executive control over whether citizens can even gather.
Here's a perfect example of institutionalized mistrust, which has a massive consequence on daily police efficiency. Section 44, the requirement for the general diary.
Oh, this is a fascinating cultural and legal insight. Section 44 mandates that every single daily activity, every decision, every movement must be recorded meticulously in a general diary.
Why? Why so much paperwork?
The reason the British implemented this was purely control. They severely mistrusted the native constables at 87% heavy base, and they mandated hyperdocumentation as a disciplinary tool to ensure compliance and prevent what they perceived as incompetence or corruption.
So what's the modern consequence of this culture of mandatory mistrust?
It creates institutionalized inefficiency and a massive paperwork burden. Lower-level officials spend an inordinate amount of time completing documentation just to satisfy the hierarchy, and that's often at the expense of being out in the field doing proactive police work.
Right.
That culture, where endless recording is prioritized because you're perpetually suspected of wrongdoing, it just lingers in the system today, long after the British left, and it paralyzes field work and fosters resentment.
So if we pull all this together, the overall legal environment grants extremely wide, unchecked, discretionary powers concerning things like search, seizure, arrest, and public assembly, while at the same time mandating this crippling bureaucratic oversight on the constables at the bottom.
Precisely. When discretionary power is high at the top and accountability is filtered through a hierarchical command structure that's focused on obedience per Section 23, you create a system that is inherently resistant to public accountability and just ripe for procedural delay. The law actively defines a command structure, not a collaborative one.
We've covered the structural and the legal, but maybe the hardest things to change are the cultural and mental legacies. The sources point directly to a lingering feudal mindset that dictates how police interact with the public, and also how officers interact with their own subordinates.
This is the residue of what you could call the imperial feudal rural approach. It's the persistence of an autocratic, often condescending mindset in police-public interactions, especially at the FANA level. It's the subtle yet constant implication that the police are masters of their domain, not servants of the community.
And it's driven by that elitism and hierarchy the British establish to create distance. There's still that association policing with pomp, show, official vehicles, a remnant of both Mughal and British imperial eras designed to project inaccessible authority.
And I think the most damaging internal manifestation of this is the way the British culture of officers treating their subordinates like servants just persists. Our sources confirm that this culture continues today, sometimes leading to the use of constables for personal household work, a practice known informally as the BGAR system.
Wait. Using uniformed officers for cleaning, cooking, or driving family members around. How does that impact the 87% base?
It is profoundly demoralizing. It's a blatant misuse of state resources and a clear continuation of that imperial master-servant relationship right within the ranks.
I mean, if a constable is treated as a servant by their immediate superior, how can you expect that same constable to treat the civilian public as anything other than subordinates?
You can't. It institutionalizes the idea that power is to be abused, and it starts from the top down.
That creates a massive psychological barrier for any kind of reform. How do you transition from a legally mandated culture of control and a socially ingrained culture of feudal service to, genuine community partnership? It seems almost impossible without some fundamental shifts.
And this is where we see modern administrative efforts trying to force that change. Our sources do highlight a positive development, the necessary shift towards citizen policing, where public participation and technology are challenging that entrenched top-down control model.
The example given is fascinating because it uses technology to enable an accountability that the hierarchy naturally resists. Can you tell us more about the Delhi Traffic Police Facebook page?
Sure. Historically, if you saw a traffic violation, you had to report it, and then the police hierarchy would decide if they wanted to pursue it. It was completely top-down. With this Facebook page initiative, citizens could post photo or video evidence of traffic violations directly onto a platform that was monitored by the police.
So the accountability mechanism suddenly becomes horizontal. It's citizen to citizen, but mediated by technology.
Exactly. And this is revolutionary because it creates verifiable external evidence that is very difficult for the system to ignore. The police are basically forced to issue tickets based on this citizen evidence. And crucially, the sources note, this even extended to issuing tickets to police officers and VIPs who were caught violating traffic rules in the footage.
That's powerful. It's a structural change enabled by public participation that provides a small but significant crack in that command and control facade. It forces horizontal accountability and proves that the service model can be adopted, but only if the tools for external checks are provided.
It really shows that the future of policing may rely less on the 1861 Act and more on decentralized technological accountability.
Okay, let's consolidate the administrative reality today. We should reiterate that police is a state subject under the 7th Schedule, Article 246 of the Constitution. So structure, control, and funding are primarily state responsibilities.
Which is why reform efforts are often so piecemeal.
Right. And operationally, we are still running two distinct structures inherited from the British in parallel. The IG system, which is the general, traditional, or rural structure, and the commissioner system, the urban one.
Let's detail the IG system again, just to be clear, focusing on the full hierarchy and why it is inseparable from that concept of dual control.
Go for it.
Okay, so starting at the highest level, the state is overseen by the Director General of Police, or DGP. Below this, massive regions are often divided into zones, headed by an Inspector General of Police, the IGP. Then you have the range level, managed by the Deputy Inspector General, or DIG.
But the crucial administrative hub, the place where the civilian executive intervenes, is the district level.
That's where the Superintendent of Police, the SP, sits. And remember, the SP is the head of police for the district, but is subject to the general supervision of the district magistrate, the DM.
Okay.
Below the district, you have subdivisions, led by a deputy superintendent of police, or DSP, and then circles, led by a circle inspector.
And finally, the station level, the SANA, where you find the station house officer, the SHO. And the entire system is characterized by this dual hierarchy, which leads to all that friction and often politically motivated deployment we talked about.
Now, let's pivot to the alternative model, the one designed for density and complexity, the commissioner system. This system emerged precisely to solve the slowness and friction that's inherent in dual control for large metropolitan areas.
And this was introduced for major cities, typically defined by having a population over 5 lakhs, based on National Police Commission recommendations. It's a streamlined structure designed for rapid response in these high-pressure urban environments.
It's headed by a single authoritative figure, the Commissioner of Police, or CP. The rank itself is determined by the city's size. It might be a DGP in a massive city like Delhi, or an additional DGP in Mumbai.
And the hierarchy below the CP is much flatter, much more direct. It's just commissioner to deputy commissioner to assistant deputy commissioner, inspector, and then constable.
The goal is efficiency and direct accountability within the police structure itself, without that administrative interference.
Let's use the source comparison points to systematically break down why the commissioner system is such a profound departure from the traditional IG model. I think this really summarizes the tension between colonial control and modern autonomy.
Okay, let's do it.
Starting with control, this is the most significant difference.
In the IG system, control is inherently fractured. It's under the district administration, requiring the SVT answer to the DM. That's dual control. In the commissioner system, there is no dual control. The police report directly under the state government or the state home ministry, which makes the line of authority clear and immediate.
Okay, second point, magisterial powers. This is where the police gain executive authority they normally lack.
Right. In the IG system, those regulatory powers like licensing, issuing permits for public events, controlling security, are all held by the district magistrate, the collector. But in the commissioner system, those executive, regulatory, and judicial powers are centralized and vested in the police commissioner themselves.
So the CP handles not just the investigation, but also the executive oversight of public order management and regulation. It just eliminates a massive layer of administrative bureaucracy that slows down the traditional system.
And finally, the hierarchy reflects this centralization. The IG system has multiple, often conflicting intermediaries between the police chief and the state leadership. The commissioner system reports directly. It streamlines the chain of command and centralizes executive and police authority in one single office.
What's so fascinating about this comparison is that it presents two fundamentally different philosophies of governance coexisting within the same country. The IG system is cautious, it requires executive oversight of the armed force, a clear colonial legacy.
Whereas the commissioner system trusts the police leadership with executive powers, prioritizing speed and autonomy in complex urban settings. It's the constant struggle between that 1861 model and modern administrative needs.
What a profound structural journey. I mean, we started with the necessity of dharma in ancient statecraft, moved through the defined structures of the Mughals, only to hit that critical choice made by the British in the 19th century.
Prioritizing control and suppressing dissent by adopting the Irish constabulary model.
The main takeaway for you listening to this is that nearly every operational reality of policing today, from that overwhelming pyramid structure where 87% are powerless constables, to the structural friction of dual control, is a direct, traceable legacy of colonial governance.
The system was designed to control, not to serve.
And that fundamental tension is why contemporary reforms, including the shift to commissionerates and citizens policing, are constantly battling a deeply entrenched legal and structural architecture that was built for obedience.
And that battle brings us right back to the core legal mandate. If the goal is truly to shift the police culture from that historical imperial feudal approach to genuine public service, we have to look at the law itself.
Section 23 of the 1861 Act. It explicitly defines the role of the police as prioritizing following orders. That sets the fundamental organizational ethos.
So ask yourself this. If the foundational legal document of policing defines success purely as hierarchical obedience and maintaining state order, and it does not mandate service to the public, what structural or legal changes beyond just, shifting titles like SP to CP are most essential to truly mandate and incentivize a public service culture?
Is it even possible to have a public service police force if the law doesn't legally require them to serve the public?
That's the difficult question governance has to answer as it tries to rewrite the colonial software.